only mode.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to What the Data? Rethinking Your Travel Data Strategy. My name is Karen Thomas, and I will be providing technical support during this webinar. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few items so you know how to participate in today's event. You should see a control panel on the right-hand side of your computer desktop. You can listen to the session either by using your computer speakers or by phone. If you've decided to listen by phone, please select the telephone option located in the audio pane of your control panel and enter all of the telephone mode information displayed, including the audio pin. You will have the opportunity to submit text questions to today's presenters by typing your questions into the questions pane of the control panel. You may send in your questions at any time during the presentation. We will collect these and address them during the Q&A session to be conducted at the end of today's presentation. I would now like to hand over to Jennifer Steinke, your moderator for today's webinar.
Thank you, Karen, and welcome everyone to Business Travel Executive Magazine's second webinar in our series, Going Deeper. Today we're going to tackle the topic of data in our What the Data? Rethinking Your Travel Data Strategy webinar. First, I'd like to just introduce myself as the moderator. I'm Jennifer Steinke. I'm the manager of corporate travel at DICOM Industries. I've been in the business over 30 years and have a passion for data and all things around data. So I'm excited to visit with our panelists today and kind of see what they're doing in their programs to tackle this topic and what their strategies are and stuff. So we're going to get started. I'd like to first want to thank Certified Travel and Expense for being our sponsor today, and just quickly highlight the Certified Enterprise Travel product. Whether your organization needs a dynamic online booking tool for its business travelers or a powerful new engine for any travel management company you prefer to work with, Certified Enterprise Travel has features, flexibility, and dependable service that really makes corporate travel easy. It's a desktop and mobile applications that delivers user-centric, hassle-free experience with automated policy compliance and pre-trip approval, all backed by its expense platform also. So I really want to thank Certified for sponsoring our webinar today. And at that point, let's get right into what we're going to do here today. First, I want to talk a little bit about today's challenges. We're going to hear from two travel managers as well as a supplier's perspective. So we have Kevin McDonald, Rita Visser with us, and then Nicolas Borel from Amadeus. They'll share their stories from the buyer and supplier perspective, and then I'm going to pose a question to them at the end as to kind of where they see things going in the area of data. So WTD, right? What's the data? Everybody's talking about it. Big data. I write a series for Business Travel Executive called Fat Data, trying to make it hip, cool, and relevant for our industry today. But there's a lot of it, right? So we are faced as buyers and suppliers and inundated with data. But just in general, every single day, there's 2.5 quintillion bits of data that are produced. That's like, I had to look it up. It was 18 zeros. I didn't know how much a quintillion was. It's a lot of information, and every single day, we're being consumed by more and more data, whether it's in our social media platforms, whether it's within our corporate programs, whether it's what our travelers are feeding back to us, our suppliers. It's just a lot of information, and that can really be overwhelming. And so I think today, as we hear the stories from our panelists as to how you can build a strategy, what you're looking for, and how maybe there's some takeaways that you can implement within your managed travel program. Staggeringly enough, 100% of travelers have more information at their fingertips than ever before, right? So they're smarter than they ever were. They're smarter than me as a travel buyer. They know how to do it better, faster, quicker, more efficiently, all that kind of stuff. So we have to get our arms around these perceptions of the types of data that our travelers are facing. And interestingly enough, one component of data is sort of this user-generated content. And that's like your Yelps and your TripAdvisors and things like that. And 84% of business travelers say they use this type of data, this content that they have at their fingertips to make and impact their travel decisions. So you can see how that potentially, could be a challenge, right, for a travel buyer or supplier when, they're finding out so much information from others that have either stayed there, ate there, lived there, breathed there, whatever it is, right? And there was recently a study that talked about, non-compliance, and 54%, the stat's not on here, but 54% of business travelers have admitted to going outside of their travel policy, and on at least one occasion, and 47% of those people state that convenience was the reason, right? So when we think about all the stuff that our travelers are experiencing, right, there's a lot of data and information around that. And so I think it's really important that we constantly kind of keep our finger on the pulse of sort of what's happening from our travelers' perspective around data, and what you can do to use that to influence whether it's policy, whether it's processes, whether it's your supplier relations. It's important that I think as buyers and suppliers, we keep some of these facts in mind. So as a travel manager myself, and with my esteemed panelists here, there's challenges around data, right? We have to admit that we are not living in a perfect world. There's all the talk about big data and all that stuff, but what the heck are we doing about it, right? As a buyer, we're faced with all these disparate sources of data, right, that are in a very siloed environment right now, right? So you can't just pluck out of the cloud bits of information, that you want to utilize. You have to go to different sources to get that, and that can be challenging. As well as data normalization, it's complicated in this business. There's 18 different ways to call a hotel, and name it and all that, and to try to normalize that to make sure you have accurate information. So buyers really need to start thinking about developing strong data strategies. Do you have the right information at the right time, and are you telling the right stories to the right people? We still have, privacy and data concerns, security concerns. There's, the new GDPR, and there's all these different things that are happening around the globe that as buyers we have to be aware of. And probably lastly is it can be scary if you think about if we were able to really get our arms around data and what we're doing with it, that it could very easily become commoditized. And that would mean buyers could actually, share information in ways, and suppliers can share information in ways that, maybe aren't identifying just everybody, and, but in very general terms. And so it could become a commodity, much like buying papers or pencils or hotel room nights, whatever it might be. So that can be scary. So we have to always keep our awareness up as to, what's happening in that area. So with that being said, I want to turn the time over now to our first panelist, Rita Visser. So Rita is the Director of Global Travel Sourcing and GPO at Oracle. So it's Oracle, they have lots of data, right? She oversees all the global travel procurement activities and supplier relations. She's been in the business over 20 years. And she's very active in the industry. You probably heard her speak once or twice. She sits on the board of GBTA as the Vice President. I'm also on the board, so we work together in that area. So I think Rita's got a great story to tell. So Rita, why don't you kind of shine some light on what you have going on at Oracle around data, and how you've developed your strategy, and kind of what you're thinking about today, tomorrow, how you're aligning this to make sure that you're meeting your overall program objectives.
Happy to. Thanks, Jennifer. So just so everybody understands what we're talking about at Oracle, so Oracle is, I'm not going to read through all of these points. I'll point out the second one, $500 million in global spend. So if you think about every dollar that's spent, the data that sits behind every single one of those dollars. So it's in a buying decision, et cetera. So $500 million in spend, there's a lot of data that sits behind all of that. And how do you create a strategy so you can manage that effectively, both from a compliance, a cost savings, and a customer experience opportunity. And the bottom 2 points, some of the things that make this a little bit easier for us in a large program is we do just have one single agency. So we, are working with them as a single data aggregator on the TMC data. And then it also is very helpful for us to know that in most countries across the globe, we're averaging upwards of 90 to 95% utilization of an online booking tool. So some of that normalization that Jennifer was talking about earlier, when things go through one standard source, in a booking tool, and our booking tool right now is Get There. So when we look at that, and there's some normalization that can happen, and when that happens on 90% of your reservations, that makes some of that relatively easy. So moving on to the next screen, just wanted to talk about some of the things that we're doing at Oracle. So a few years ago, we took our travel data and brought it in-house. So at that point, what was interesting for me is when we were using a data consolidator historically, we'd be asking questions like, how are you picking up a connection? What does a through fare look like? You know, the hotel normalization stuff. Why are there two different codes for one hotel? All of those things. So when I sat down with our IT team to create our travel data warehouse, it was great because I could help them to understand, here's what a through fare looks like. Here are the things that you need to keep in mind. So it was interesting to be a part of it. Obviously, agency was the first place that we tied all that information in. And then the second and easiest after that was our card program. So we have American Express for our card program in most countries. So to tie that back in, and again, that came with a level of a pretty good level of heavy lifting as well. How is the data coming in? How are we matching it up? When we're running reports, for instance, do I want an agency or a TMC data report and an Amex report separately? How do we manage the differences between there? And then obviously we use Oracle iExpense because we should. And so we're working, so the next layer in this three-legged stool is to bring our expense data in. So we're doing some updates to our internal expense tool, and then that's something that we're working on. So those, and I get that not most companies have the opportunity to create their own data warehouse. And I am a little bit like Jennifer, I'm a data geek. So when we were given the opportunity, it was something really exciting for us to be able to do and to be a part of.
So Rita, I'd like to ask you a question about that. So tell me what you're consolidating all this data, and then do you have a strategy around who you deliver what to, or like once you've got it, what are you doing with it internally to tell your story about your program?
Yeah, and Jennifer, you used the word in your intro, overwhelming, right? So we have, and even if you don't have data in-house, right? The data that's at our fingertips these days is overwhelming. For instance, if I wanted to send to everybody who I thought needed really good travel data, they would look at me like I had three heads. So it really comes down to, creating a strategy that says, here's what I think should happen. Here is the data that I think this group of people would be beneficial to. So for instance, I think of our finance directors in each of the regions, right? And so having a number of conversations with them saying things like, what are you missing? What's going to help you to make the best budget decisions? What's helping you to understand, that the way that your travelers, our employees are traveling, what's going to help you? Everything from, are people following the rules? Or, gosh, is someone doing so much travel, that, gosh, we should think about, okay, how is that impacting what they're doing in their day-to-day life? So it's looking at all the data that you have, and then who can benefit from it. So it's creating that piece of the strategy that gets really difficult. Because there are times, and I'll be straight up, there are times within our organization I had to convince somebody why they might need some data that I was going to send to them. And then it's going back to them and saying, okay, you're getting this data. Do you want to get it differently? How often do you want to get this? What do you do with it when you get it? I have those conversations internally with my own team. Let's say we get a monthly report from a car vendor. I say to the person on my team, what are you doing with that data? Let's make sure that it's actionable, that it's something that's worthwhile. I'm not going to take my time to send a report to somebody who doesn't ever open it. So the biggest part of my strategy when setting all of this up was, I'm not just going to, backload somebody's email with reports that they don't know what I'm trying to tell them, what they're supposed to do with it, or in the long run, what capabilities or what can they learn from it. So that was the start to that strategy of that. Jennifer, did that answer your question?
That's great. Yeah, no, that's great. That's great. I think that's very insightful. And you're right. It's about telling the right story to the right person, right? And, at the right time. So that's good. That's excellent. Perfect. I'll let you go on now.
Yeah, thanks. And you're right, data tells a story. And if you're telling it to a person that cares about the story, it's easier to tell. So, so the benefits of, I think we just talked through some of this. The benefits of having my own data is I can create the outputs based on what we need. Timely. Of course, we still have, TMCs are still going to have a time lag in, for instance, there's some countries I get data feeds into my system every day. There are some countries where it's every 15 days, and some countries it's once a month. But based on that level of information, I also know, let's say I'm running a Q1 report. I know that I can't, even think about running that Q1 report from a TMC data on the 15th of the month and think that I'm going to have everything, for instance, from China. But I can run that on the Amex spend side, for instance. I can run a credit card report and start to see where I'm trending. And the other benefit is I've got an in-house data specialist who, I sometimes call him my work husband. I'll reach out to him and I'm like, here's what I'm dreaming about. So the other day my conversation was about, I want to look at, I'm sick of looking in the past. I want to look at some forecasting reports, and the forecasting, looks differently. And we have to take into account things like our advanced purchase in what countries. And so, I have somebody that I can bounce things off of. And there are times he tells me that I'm crazy. And there are times that he's like, I think I can work with that. So just having that internal resource that both understands travel data, because he helped me create it, or he learned through he and I creating this tool together. So he understands it, and then he also understands what some of our capabilities and challenges are internally. So those are the benefits of creating your own data warehouse. Now, I think the next one is challenges. Let's be honest, travel data isn't high on the list of priorities. As a company that manages data for a number of large organizations, through our SaaS, PaaS, and through those types of products, when something internally isn't working, they aren't necessarily the first to jump up and go, "Oh, let me fix that for you," because they're fixing things for our customers that are really paying really good money for that. So that's one of the challenges. I do see long-term benefits of bringing in supplier data, but because of some of the challenges to bring all that in to normalize it, we're still working through some of those challenges. Might be something that we look at down the road, might not be, because it all goes back to that strategy. Once I have it, what am I going to do with it? I don't want somebody to spend their IT resources to figure out how to send me a data file that in the end I'm not going to use. So, and that's the other thing I talked about with a data and a reporting strategy. It does have to change all the time. You got to think about different things. How can you bring in different information, but only bring in information that's relevant? Or gosh, sit down with an EVP who says, Rita, this is information that I've been looking for forever. Oh gosh, we don't have that now. How can I get that information for you? So it isn't a strategy that you can tie your horse to and think that it's never going to change. And then anomalies will always exist in the data. I mean, that doesn't change whether it's, you're running data directly out of a TMC. Just because I bring it in-house, it's interesting. When we brought it in-house, everybody thought data was going to be perfect. Like that. Actually, let's remember that isn't always going to be the case. When you're comparing different data sets, there are going to be some anomalies. And getting people within our own program, within our own company, to realize and recognize, for instance, TMC data is going to vary from ours, and supplier data is going to vary, and then card information is going to vary even further. To talk to people who deal with data day in and day out, it was difficult for them to not have things tie out, but we're working on that. And then if we can move on, that would be great. So these are things that we provide internally, obviously. We've got dashboards on things like advanced purchase. What organizations are doing really well with advanced purchase? What organizations aren't doing so well in low fare acceptance? We've got one single compliance dashboard that talks about the number of tickets that go into a bank for a line of business. How much is sitting in the ticket bank for a line of business? What does that mean? Number of exchanges. So it's a snapshot in here's the way things are happening. We also do things like report cards. for the, if somebody wants a report card on their group, so they come to me and say, or they go to my data person and say, I want to do a report on line of business 747. And so they run a line of business on 747. And Rita Visser, because she never books her hotels through our system, she might end up with a D. But the person that does everything the way that they're supposed to do, from a policy perspective, they might have an A or an A minus. So then they can take a look at that and go, okay, what's causing Rita Visser to fall in that D category from a compliance standpoint? Audit requirements. I think anybody who works for a large company knows that there are sometimes fiduciary and HR audits that have to happen. So obviously those happen. And then we work closely with our, for our meetings, different meetings that we might be having. The spend information for budget planning. I go back to the FDs and say, what information can I help you with? How can I never want to have somebody in a position where they've either got a ton of budget at the end of the year and they're trying to figure out how to use it up, or, oh my goodness, we've so overspent because we didn't plan appropriately. So that's giving them insight on things like, what are we hearing now for hotel rates in 18? What are some things that they should be thinking about in our office moves and our hotel spend? And as we see, higher utilization, for instance, of our partner in Lyft, what are they seeing in ground transportation spend? Where are they, what things are going up and what things are going down? So those are all the types of data that we provide internally to people. And Jennifer, you asked the question, how do you decide who gets it? Some of that is from who needs it, who is asking for it, how often do they want it, how often do they need it. But there are times, we'll also run a report and go, we don't think anybody's looking at this. This is something that we should probably pay attention to. If we've got high number of tickets that are expiring in a ticket bank, what should we be doing about that? What is my team on the procurement side? How is that changing conversations we're having with airlines? Or maybe it's just bad booking behaviors on the part of our travelers. And what can we do to help them make better decisions? And then the next slide is, we move to the next slide. So, in how we use it, obviously in our supplier and contract management, I talked a little bit about compliance, but the one thing that I've been working with my team in a program the size of Oracle, if we only ever looked at our top, let's call it our top 20 routes, our top 100 routes, places like, point of sale France might never get looked at. So we are taking all of our global data and then getting down to the local. So looking at our buying patterns, point of sale France, when people in France are traveling, what are they doing? Where are they traveling? Where are they staying? What are their online booking buying behaviors? What's their advanced purchase? What are some things that we need to know about so we can make really good decisions for them? A really good example is a few years ago, it's probably 5 years ago now, we acquired a large company in India, and we were looking at our hotel spend, and our hotel spend in India, we were getting in all the tried and true hotels that someone from North America who's traveling to India would want. But the person that lives in India, that travels from Mumbai to Delhi for a 2-day meeting, isn't going to stay at a hotel that I would normally be comfortable staying in as a North American person traveling there. We weren't really meeting that need very well because we weren't looking at it. We were making really broad stroke decisions. So that gave us an opportunity to look at buying behaviors locally at the expense data, because maybe we weren't even making it available in our booking tool, at the expense data that says, gosh, there's a whole section out there of people that are going outside of our program because we aren't giving them the level of hotels that they need or that they feel comfortable with or that their budget will allow for. And that's when I go back to that 500 million. I think it really would be very easy to just manage our top 100 cities, our top 100 routes, our top 100 whatever. But the person in France, the person in India, the person in Costa Rica, their travel patterns or their travel buying behaviors would never be met. We'd never be able to address those if we only looked at our data on a global basis. My team is doing that really well. And then, some of the other things, when I say it's not all homemade, we're going outside, we're working with a product now as part of our strategy that, for instance, if Rita Visser is traveling and she steps up and she uses her American Express at American Airlines, and I've got a reservation that this entity has recognized, and then American Airlines charges my card $112. Working on a process now where at that $100, $112, that traveler will get a message and say, we actually have already done everything transactionally that you needed to do to travel. What did you pay American for today? Oh, okay. Well, just so you know, that upgrade isn't an allowable expense. Or Rita Visser, because she got a D on that report, she never books her hotel through us. When she goes to New York and she charges her hotel, and as she's leaving, of course, Amex gets a charge. They'll get a note. Rita Visser will get a note that says, we understand that you use your corporate American Express card at this hotel. We don't see a corresponding agency information that goes along with that. Help us to understand what drove that buying behavior that took you outside of our program. But it's getting to that next level. Yeah, it will be really cool. Again, it isn't something that we've created internally. We found a solution that would, outside the organization that might be able to help us, get to some of that data. The challenge, it isn't like I'm going to tell somebody that they did the wrong thing. But if Rita Visser has 60 hotel nights that we never know about because it's not done through our TMC, and then, we can pull it in through expense, but expense data sometimes is really tough. Help us to understand what that is, because if we need to change things in how we're buying or how we're negotiating or the data that we're pulling, not being able to tie all those together really makes that a challenge. So we're working on a way to try to make that happen.
No, that's great. I think, Rita, you've got an amazing story here, right? You're a big organization. Not all things are as big as Oracle, right? But I think sort of your thought process and what you've actually been doing is very enlightening and gets people thinking, how can I just take my program, big, medium, small, whatever it might be, and really apply some of these things. So we thank you so much for sharing your story. I do want to remind everyone that you can type in any questions for our panelists at any time, and we will have some time for Q&A towards the end. So if something's burning in your soul you want to know about, feel free to type it in the control panel, and we'll get to that. So I'd like to go now to our next panelist, our next buyer, Kevin McDonald. He's the Senior Director for Strategic Procurement at PPD. He's been, he manages procurement and travel, so he wears a lot of hats there. He's been managing travel for over 20 years. And so, Kevin, I'd like you to kind of briefly take us through a little bit about the travel program at PPD, and then what you guys are doing around your data strategy. And you have a unique situation, so I'll let you share that with the audience.
Okay, great. Thanks, Jen. PPD isn't as well known as Oracle, so tell everyone what we are. We're a clinical trials company. We run drug trials for the big pharma and biotechnology companies, about 22,000 people, 46 different countries. What makes us a little unique is we actually operate as a corporate travel department. So we are our own TMC, if you will, covering about 90% of our travel, primarily out of North America and the UK. Travel spend, I thought I had a big program until Rita went, but I'm about $93 million a year, including some meeting stuff that we do. Our data, because we operate as a CTD, we're managing all of our own travelers and things like that. Our data kind of falls, we think about data into different buckets, right? So, from a traveler experience standpoint, we want to make sure we identify frequent travelers, that they're taken care of. We have true road warriors that are having, I saw an American report the other day, someone had 70 different trips in a year. So we have those, and we want to make sure they're taken care of. We track trip interruptions. We want to know whether someone is, what a reliability factor is. If someone is constantly going between Wilmington, North Carolina and Austin, Texas, and they're getting delayed 6 different times, then we've got to figure out a different way of routing them, or talk to our airline partners and things like that, and what can we do in order to better that trip. But also look at new travel patterns. We start clinical trials all the time, and we stop them all the time. A drug doesn't pan out, we cancel the trial, we pick up a new one, all those types of things. So we're trying to get more into the forecasting business so we can understand what our travel patterns are going to be, so we can go to talk to our vendors and our partners and figure out what we need to have for as far as contractual changes in order to make sure that we're optimizing our benefits. That's just okay. So then we also use it for sourcing. We're utilizing data to identify and negotiate all of our provider agreements. We're optimizing the policy and behavior of the travel dollars that are spent. If we're seeing things that are changing, such as it became back to us that it was a real big hassle for people to change flights all the time. So we ran for connecting flights. So we changed data, and then we changed our policy so that if there's a direct flight available, people are able to take that direct flight instead of having to connect in order just to save $10 or $50 or whatever the number was. We did put a ceiling on that, but it's benefiting our employees. And so those are the types of things that we're getting out of data. Forecasting demand, I mentioned, benchmarking ourselves not only against similar type travel companies, but also against our competition in our marketplace. And global strategy. How does data fit into our global strategy? 90% of our data we can control. However, the other 10% is fragmented across a lot of smaller TMCs, a lot of smaller companies. And so how do we get all that data together and make sure that we're not, to Rita's point, we're thinking globally but acting locally, making sure that we have the right hotels or we have the right ground transportation partners and things like that in some of these different countries that it doesn't necessarily pay to go with the biggest players.
So Kevin, it sounds to me like you're balancing your ownership of travel and your internal customers, your travelers, as well as your procurement hat. Do you ever find that those two things don't necessarily meet and that maybe there's conflict in having to sort of manage both of those things under one roof?
Absolutely. And so there's often conflict, right? And so you have to figure out what would be best for our end customers, who's the client or sponsors. The other thing that's interesting about us is that 70% of our travel is actually reimbursed by our sponsors. So we have a fiduciary responsibility to them to control the cost on a trial. But we're balancing that out against travel experience, and then we spin that data to try to make sure that we're meeting all of our contractual agreements and things like that. It's a constant balancing act, and it makes it really interesting because I sit in the procurement side as well as the travel management side. So I have interesting discussions with myself all the time.
I'm sure you do. Hopefully you can agree with yourself on occasion. So go ahead, continue your story.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, that's fine. Other things that we use data for, though, is things like duty of care, right? Because as a CTD, we can't turn to a TMC and say, okay, something happened in Paris yesterday, and what happened, and who do we have there, and how do we get in contact with them? We maintain all of our own traveler profiles. We maintain, where they are. I had an instance come up today where we had to track down somebody because one of our travelers called his son and said he slipped and fell in a hotel, and the son couldn't get in touch with him, couldn't get him to answer his cell phone, so he wanted us to track him down and find out how he was doing and what was going on. So we did, but that's because we had the data in-house and we could do that fairly rapidly. So we take duty of care very seriously because our people are on the road all the time and they're all over the place. Compliance, we do have a travel policy. We have a program. Like I said, we're responsible to our sponsors. So a lot of times our program is actually more stringent than that of our sponsors. We have to certify that. So it's a matter of being able to make sure that we do have very high compliance. I think we're running about 98% program compliance, which is, I was very happy with that number. And similar to Oracle, our online booking is running about probably right around 90%, between 89 and 90% for North America and for the UK, which helps us as well. We're looking to expand that out across some of the regions as far as APAC, Latin America, and actually we're looking to put an EU platform in place as well in the next year. Then as a CTD, it's a different data set, right? So you're not dealing with traveler data so much as you are efficiency. How quickly are we answering the phone call for those calls that come in, either problems with visas or they want to change something, they don't know how to do it in the online booking tool. Number of trip changes. We recently went through an analysis. We had a consultant in, and she found that we're leaving money on the table because we've kind of wandered away from, we had a recommendation for 14-day advance booking, and we've kind of wandered away from that. And we're much closer to the 7-day right now. And so one of my concerns is that because we respond so quickly to our customers' demands, it's great to book a trip 14 days in advance, but if you're going to change it 3 times in those 2 weeks, then your change fees alone, we're going to eat up whatever savings you have. But we were able to pull out the fact that less than 9% of our trips actually change if they're booked 14 days in advance. And so it does make sense to push back on that 14-day and try to get the savings in as well. transaction volume, am I staffed correctly? Do I have enough agents? Do I not have enough agents? I know that you're going to have those ebbs and flows, and it's a little bit interesting, but the CTD metrics are really more of being a TMC, being your own TMC. And like I said, forecasting and trying to make sure that I have adequate after hours, things like that. Go ahead, Jen, you want to switch? Sources of data. The big challenge we have is we have a lot of data, and we get it from things such as trams and different agency feeds that we use that are outside. We're using Cornerstone as an aggregation product right now. We get vendor data in, and we try to find ways to put all that stuff in. After Hour Services provides us data, and then of course our OBTs. However, the challenge is turning data into information, right? And I would love to say that we're really proactive and we generate a lot of dashboards and a lot of reports, and we don't. What we do is we identify opportunities and or issues, and we make sure that we have adequate data in order to solve those and to come up with recommendations, and or whether it be a policy change or just tracking someone down. Unfortunately, I would say at this point we're much more reactionary than I would like to be. I'd like to move to a more proactive approach with data. But we are where we are, and we're trying to move forward with that. Basically, one of the things I think that was mentioned before as well is that the data lag, right? It's not real time. We're probably as close to real time as anybody else is, because I can know what was booked yesterday or what was ticketed yesterday. I don't have to wait for a TMC to close out their billings or close out their month and report to me. But I still do have a data lag, and my vendor information comes in and always lags. And someone else talked about discrepancy of between the different sources, and if you're getting vendor data and you're trying to match it with what was booked through your own CTD, then you have to account for those lags and make sure that you are tracking or adequately reporting your trending and things like that. And I don't have a tool set at this point. I don't have a data warehouse. I would love one. And I don't have an analyst associated with me. It's usually me. But I would love an easily configurable tool set where I could go and pull out cubes of data and say, this is what I'm trying to look at, and this is the business problem I'm identifying, and I want to go solve, and I want to be more forward-looking than I am backward-looking, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it certainly does. I think we can see, if we think about Rita's story at Oracle, big, large company, huge spend, and being able to bring everything in-house, and they're still facing challenges too with the data. And I think it goes back to my first comments that, will we ever really get the utopia of data that we want? I don't know. I think that technology is certainly going to help us get there. So anytime we can wrap our arms around technology to help support that is a great thing. So Kevin, I think in your story is, balancing these two things, running an operation is hard enough on its own, right? That's why most people outsource it. And you've been very successful with your in-source CTD model, but also wearing your procurement hat. So, it's tough sometimes to balance those two things. And I think as buyers, we're often challenged to kind of be everything to everybody, right? So one of the things I think that we really depend on are suppliers to help us with this. So I think what we should do now is bring our supplier panelists into the conversation. And I've been extremely impressed over the years. I've been sort of watching what Amadeus has been doing around the data components. I've actually had them in some of my fat data stories. So I would like to introduce our next panelist, Nicolas Borel. He's the head of analytics and data strategy, corporate strategy for Amadeus. You can see here he's been around for his entire career in travel, so good for him. Me too. And now I'd like to hear, and he's the CEO of Amadeus Travel Intelligence BU. So what I would like to do, Nicolas, is have you kind of share what Amadeus is doing, as a really strong player in the data aspect, not just as a GDS, so to speak, but what you're doing holistically to help support both buyers and suppliers, and the tools and stuff that you guys are offering to help maybe meet some of the challenges that we hear from Rita and from Kevin and things that I've talked about for many years. So I'm going to turn it over to you now and
sure.
Hopefully follow
good morning,
along. So
good afternoon, everyone. Yeah. Sure. So maybe for those who don't know Amadeus, we are the technology provider connecting the travel ecosystem. So we are a platform in the middle between the travel providers on the one hand, with hundreds of airlines putting their content into our platforms, hundreds of airports, thousands of hotel properties and so on the one hand, and the travel sellers, the travel agencies, the TMCs and so on the other hand, and also, of course, the travel buyers, the corporations, and the travelers, to whom we offer some solutions in order to simplify their lives, of course. Okay, so all with this position, this central position in the middle of the entire ecosystem, it's true that we have, let's say, some hundreds of petabytes of data about all the steps of the travel journey, and we strive to exploit the best we can all these data in order to make more efficient, more appealing solutions in order to sort out all the challenges Kevin and Rita have mentioned. So the good news for them, by the way, is that the challenges they are meeting, but by that they are not at all an exception. We just sponsored an independent report carried out by the London School of Economics that shows that there are lots of room for improvement all across the process. I'm sorry, this slide is a bit thick, but you get the most of it through the pies on the left. There is still a lot of room of improvement across all the steps of the travel journey in order to apply the best practices. Okay, and among these best practices, we see that there is one common thread, which is actually data, and this is what we are focusing on. It's to make the data smarter in order to optimize all the steps, and in particular to improve the return on investment of the travel programs in general. Okay, so I advise you to refer to this study that is available in Amadeus' website in particular, in order to see that there are plenty of opportunities that are brought by data and by technology in order to fill the gap compared to the best practices in this area. So on the next slide, I was willing to give an illustration of a solution we offer, which is called Corporate Insight Travel and Expense, which is the analytics layer on top of the self-booking tool provided by Amadeus, called Citric Travel and Expense. And here we are really aiming at providing a tool that is actionable in order to improve cost control, negotiation power, policy compliance, by providing some indicators that are a bit different from the usual one, and overall, as Kevin was mentioning, something that is easily transformable. You can start from a report, transform it, change it, and you don't need to have a data scientist sitting next to you in order to be able to get the most out of the data in order to serve all these strategic objectives.
So Nicolas,
yeah.
Can I ask a quick question about this? I think this is really powerful. So in this tool, you're aggregating data from multiple sources, or just travel and just expense, or card and supplier?
So I would say there is the core solution that is by default plugged onto the solution for the self-booking tool, which is called Citric. And of course, thanks to the technology we use, which is leveraging all the big data technologies, we don't have a fixed structure underneath. In terms of, Kevin was mentioning data warehouse, cubes, and so on. This is not the case. Here we are more talking about the big data technology, meaning a data lake, and then some processing on top of the data, which are independent from the structure of the data. Thanks to these big data technologies, we can manage as well the structured data, the good old booking with a departure date, airport, departure airport, arrival airport, and so on, as well as unstructured data that may come one day. It can be the results from a survey monkey survey you carried out in your company. The other day can be a feed that is provided by one of your providers, and all that can be integrated easily into these kind of dashboards, which is the power of these kind of solutions.
That's great. Thank you.
Okay. On the next slide, you see that we strive to go even further, meaning here is an illustration of a prototype we did. So it's a proof of concept, but it's very powerful in the sense that thanks to these new technologies, maybe you have always read like me that by booking 2 days earlier, you can save X% more because the average is 2% per day of advance booking, or these kind of things. Here, we can do it much more powerfully in the sense that thanks to the power of the processing, of the data processing, you can go and simulate exactly ticket by ticket what was the price that were offered 2 days before, 1 day before, and so on. And with a very simple cursor, you make this simulation, and instead of applying a rule of 3 to the average of your spend or your average spend per traveler, here it goes ticket by ticket in order to get the difference in terms of price, and then afterwards aggregate everything in order to provide you with a figure about the potential savings that is actually much more accurate and trustable than trustworthy than anything that was provided so far. Okay, and this is even more powerful. You can also, thanks to this kind of thing you were mentioning, I think, Kevin, the nature of the travelers who may change their trips 3 times and so on. You can even think about identifying clusters of traveler between the I would call them the sheep, those who book a long time in advance and never change their mind, to the divas, meaning those who book last minute and change their mind, keep on changing their mind. This kind of behavior can be integrated even into the booking tool in order to stop offering fares that do not allow any change, any reimbursement, and so on, only to the sheep, sorry for the word, and maybe keep the full flex fares for the divas, which would save a lot of time and money to the whole chain of stakeholders in the business travel. So this is a kind of examples we use to provide to our customers in order to show them that we can go much further in the integration of analytics directly into the operational processes. And this is, for me, the future, the trends that are coming.
It's so interesting, and I love your verbiage of sheep and divas, because I think all the travel buyers on this phone can totally empathize with
term
that.
I used to use when I was a travel manager in my company. This was a very explanatory term that everybody understood.
Yes, well, I'm going to start using it. Sorry, but now hope you haven't patented that. All right, let's go on. Keep going.
Yeah, go on. So can you move to the next slide, please?
Just did. Can you see it now?
So in order to show you another example of this integration into directly the transactional systems, here we really are looping back the data, looping them back into the operational system. And here I give you the example of Amadeus Master Pricer Value Search. Maybe you know this is a search engine provided by Amadeus, and there is a special instance of this search engine dedicated to corporations, where we integrate into the search ranking algorithm some elements that are very privileged by business travelers. Of course, the price, but also the convenience, the trip duration, the number of stops, the positioning in terms of departure time, and these kind of things, and also the popularity of the flight, the popularity for a given traveler, for a given company, and for all the companies that are using the Amadeus solution. So this allows us to do more personalized search results in order to better match the expectations from the business travelers. And this contributes to make the system more relevant, to ease the pain of reviewing all the possible flights and hotel offers and so on. We are extending this kind of algorithm to more of our search engines in order to integrate the data back into the system and make the whole thing a virtuous circle, simplifying the life of everybody in this chain. In the next slide, another example of integration. Here we also strive to integrate the data we have in connection with other systems. Like here it's an example with Salesforce, the self-booking tool, Amadeus Citric, is connected to Salesforce in order to directly get the destination from the contacts or the opportunities and meetings you have scheduled in Salesforce. And it pre-populates everything in order to save you time. And what is interesting is that in a way it generates new data that you can directly integrate into the measurement of the return on investment of a given opportunity or a given sales team, and all that contributes to value the return on investment of business travel as fully part of the investment you make on a given prospect, on a given opportunity. This is the kind of connection we strive to keep on making more and more between the data coming from different sources. And here again, this is the future, the trend for the future.
This is great. Thank you so much. I think it's really interesting to see from a supplier's perspective, the types of things that you're focused on, and understanding that it's not just a one-size-fits-all for all these different programs that we have that we're trying to manage, but that depending on the company's objectives, we can certainly, try to find the right tools to help us meet those. And I think that as buyers, we start thinking about our overall strategies around data, and everybody, if you're on the phone and you're a buyer and you're not, thinking about a data strategy, you need to start now, because again, as more information gets into the hands of more people, it kind of just starts to grow. So we want to make sure that you're ahead of the game and ensuring that you're giving the right people the right stories at the right time. So, yeah. So thank you. I think we've heard 3 really, really amazing stories, and I want to thank Nicolas and Kevin and Rita for sharing. And I want to ask one question to Kevin and to Nicolas right now, and then we'll open it up for questions. So again, if you have questions, feel free to pop them in the chat box. I see we've got a couple here that we'll get to in just a minute, but I'll start with Kevin. Kevin, what's next, right? What do you think the next 5 years will bring around data? This is a very open-ended question, right, on the slide, but both for buyers and suppliers, like, where do you think we're going to be in 5 years?
I think we're going to have even more data. I think you're going to have even more sources of data, and I also think you're going to have even more uses of data, right? I mean, even though we're dealing with individual travelers, we're dealing with people, this is a metrics-driven environment, and the suppliers are pushing us towards a metric-driven environment, right? I mean, when's the last time you sat down with American Airlines and they said, I mean, they will give you things to take care of your travelers, but, they're really worried about revenue share. They're worried about markets. They're worried about everything is data controlled by them, right? And that dictates what they can give you as far as the deal goes. And that dictates what they're holding you to as far as performing against your deal. So I think you're going to see on the buyer side more data coming to our hands so that we then understand the business from our point of view, from the buyer's point of view, as well as instead of just taking it from the vendor's point of view. And I also think to what Nicolas was talking about, which looks like some really great tool sets, we're going to get more flexible tool sets and something that sits on top of all this data and turns it into useful information for you, so that the buyer can then have things at his fingertips that will so we have a better grasp of the program and how to manage their program in real time. as close as we can get
Sure.
to it, and something that will automatically take care of the discrepancies between, or that will normalize the data so it takes care of the discrepancies between sources of data. It'll reconcile those for you.
Right, and it's all going to be driven by technology, I believe. So, Nicolas, how
Right.
do you yourself or Amadeus, see the state of data in our industry in the next 5 years or so?
So I totally agree with Kevin. First, there will be more and more data coming faster and faster, covering a wider range, let's say, of steps in the journey. What is important is to be able to ensure the transversality in this data, to be able to connect the data coming from the agency to the data coming from the airline, the airport, the hotel, the rental car, and all that. Okay, this interconnection is key. What is important as well is that it will go real time. And here I would just like to insist on one thing. With the increase of the amount of data, what I call the visible analytics, meaning these kind of reports, dashboards that require the intervention of a human being in order to be understood, with the speed, with the amount of data, with the number of axes of analysis and so on, it will no longer be possible for human beings to stay in control of this. And this is the reason why in Amadeus we work very hard on machine learning, on deep learning and artificial intelligence in order to be able to integrate that, as I said, back into the loop of the operational systems in a way that the analytics provided by machines are talking directly to the machines that are integrating these insights into the systems, because the human being will no longer be fast enough in the future. So this is, for me, really the key: be able to integrate all these data in real time directly into the operational processes. And this includes the user-generated content Kevin was mentioning. We are trying, for example, to integrate in a solution which is called mobile messenger, in order to take care of the travelers. The fact that they check in at various steps in order to indicate where they are located, to indicate that they are safe back at home, and so on. And all that is integrated in order to better manage the disruptions and communicate, because we are in a central position with the airlines, with the airports, with the hoteliers, and so on.
Yeah, no, I think that's great, and I think it segues nice into, how technology and this machine learning and stuff is going to help artificial intelligence, bots, chats, all that other kind of stuff is going to really even, to Kevin's point, give us more data than we could ever know what to do with. So thank you very much. I really appreciate your insight on that. I've got a couple questions. The first one is going to go to Kevin. So again, if you have any questions, we've got a couple minutes left. I'll pose, we've got at least one question for Kevin and one question for Nicolas right now. And if we don't get to your questions, we'll certainly follow up with you after the webinar. But Kevin, the question comes in and says, from a procurement perspective, like where's your data more focused? Is it more cost savings for the organization, or is it more about the traveler experience?
Yes.
Yes to both, or?
Exactly. See, the answer is yes. It really is a balance, right? On one hand, you're trying to make sure that we think we have a fair policy, right? And so we do try to take care of our travelers, because they're the face of our company. They're the reason that we have revenue. They're the reason that, we exist. However, on the other hand, we win business because we keep our trials at a cost competitive level. So like you said before, I wear both hats and I try to wear them equally well. I'll be honest, I tend towards more cost savings. I'm trying to get the best value out of my vendor agreements, and I will lean a little bit more towards cost savings because I want to get those cost savings, so I make sure that I'm meeting all of my commitments within my agreements. However, and that also applies to the 30% of my travel that is non-reimbursed, that's corporate level.
Right.
But I do worry about the travelers, and because of that, I do try to negotiate things like I get X number of memberships or upgrades in each of our air contracts. We get automatic upgrades. We get, I think, 90% upgrades with our Hertz contract. I mean, we try to do those things in order to benefit the traveler at no expense to the cost side. So the honest answer is I straddle a line.
Great. And then one last question before we wrap to Nicolas. Tell me, the question is, are all of the products that you've shown, are you required to be an Amadeus customer, either on the GDS side or the online booking tool side? Is there anything that is standalone that a buyer might tap into?
The thing is that, of course, our strategy is to offer services. Yeah, can you hear me? Our strategy is to offer services and solutions. Let's say in support to our product offering, of course. Now the thing is, we are opening our solutions in a way that precisely you can integrate additional data and data coming from other sources. For example, today we are integrating with expense management tools that are not provided, those provided by Amadeus only, okay, in a way that we provide a comprehensive set of solutions in order to put the business travel managers in position of total control. Okay, but of course, the integration with the data already managed by the Amadeus system is seamless and facilitates a lot the integration of all that.
Great, perfect, thank you. So with that, we've just run 1 minute over. I want to thank everyone for joining the webinar today, What the Data, Rethinking Your Travel Data Strategy. You're going to receive a follow-up link, email with a link within the next 24 to 48 hours with a recorded copy of the webinar. If you know industry colleagues that you thought might benefit from this topic, and also on our website you will find the link to the webinar too. So to continue the conversation, please find Business Travel Executive on Twitter, LinkedIn, and Facebook. We want you to like, share, follow, stalk, whatever. And I want to thank, again, Certify as our sponsor today. We really appreciate that. And with that, I would like to tell everyone to have a lovely day, and we'll talk to you soon, hopefully on our next webinar in the next few months. So take care, and thanks to all of our panelists too.
Thank you very much.